Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Direwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Woohoo! Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, we're coming to America a day late because if I could show you my schedule for the next 48 days, you would weep. And I don't want to complain about my job because I love my job and it's great. But I got to tell you, I made the mistake the other day of somebody asked me to lay out my schedule for between now and the election. And I started putting all the pieces in place. And I think I may just be too old for this and may die in an airport terminal somewhere of exhaustion.
We will throw you a celebratory, wonderful funeral if that happens.
I think, it'll be worth it. They'll say
with lots of bags of meat.
That's right. At least he died doing what he loved, arguing with strangers in airports.
And going off to give speeches.
And we've got Nexstar affiliates. I'm going to Senate debates that Nexstar is hosting. News Nation, Nexstar is hosting in Pennsylvania and Nevada, Michigan. It's going to be good. I'm going to be on the ground in Georgia and in Michigan and do all that stuff. I just got back from Arizona. I think the only swing state that I'm not going to get to visit this cycle is going to be Wisconsin. I don't think I'll get back to Wisconsin, but I think I'll be through every place else. And that's what I like doing. So I shouldn't complain about it. So here endeth my whining.
Okay. On our front page, Chris, our top story and my favorite story of the week was a long story in the New York Times about how exactly Israel pulled off this ingenious, imaginative attack on Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon and Syria that extended over 2 days, first targeting the pagers of Hezbollah operatives, and then the handheld radios and some reported solar panels of these guys. And this story the headline is how Israel built a modern-day Trojan horse, exploding pagers. The Israeli government did not tamper with the Hezbollah devices that exploded. Defense and intelligence officials say it manufactured them as part of an elaborate ruse. And this has 3 bylines, including the New York Times correspondent Ronen Bergman, who is the author of a fascinating history of the Mossad. And the Mossad actually has several times blown up either phones or cell phones of terrorist leaders. So this is sort of in keeping with that, but by far the most sophisticated and imaginative of these operations. And this describes how they set up a shell company in Hungary to manufacture these pagers. And I'll just read a little bit from the piece. By all appearances, BAC Consulting was a Hungary-based company that was under contract to produce the devices on behalf of a Taiwanese company, Gold Apollo. In fact, it was part of an Israeli front, according to 3 intelligence officers briefed on the operation. They said at least 2 other shell companies were created as well to mask the real identities of the people creating the pagers, Israeli intelligence officers. BAC did take on ordinary clients for which it produced a range of ordinary pagers, but the only client that really mattered was Hezbollah, and its pagers were far from ordinary. Produced separately, they contained batteries laced with the explosive PETN, according to the 3 intelligence officers. The pagers began shipping to Lebanon in the summer of 2022 in small numbers, but production was quickly ramped up after Mr. Nasrallah denounced cell phones, and that's a reference to Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who pressed Hezbollah officials to discard their cell phones because it's sort of widely known because the Mossad has targeted cell phones in the past. They famously, in the 90s, compromised the uncle of a Hamas leader and had him give a cell phone to the Hamas leader, which they then blew up. So it's sort of known that Israel has the capability to compromise cell phones. So he pressed them to use pagers. And so Nasrallah had said, word spread among Hezbollah and its allies that no cell phone communication, even encrypted messaging apps, was safe anymore. So they then targeted the pagers and handheld radios. And so he had banned the cell phones from meetings and ordered that the details of Hezbollah movements and plans never be communicated over cell phones. And the New York Times article, which we'll link in our newsletter, it has a picture of the offices of BAC Consulting in Budapest. It's just really fascinating.
Well, straight out of, I'm the millionth person to say this, but it really is straight out of a Charles McCarry novel. The complexity, the depth, playing the long game, years in the making, exploiting your enemy's weakness, and doing this amazing surgical strike because you're doing a large number of killings, but it's a self-selecting group of people. You have to have asked for the pager in order to get it. So good. I was struck. I don't normally watch. I don't get a lot of TV news. I consume some television news, but not much. And I was on the road and I was in Arizona and I wanted to consume a lot of what Arizona television viewers were consuming. So I watched the local news and that made me watch a little of the national news. And I was amazed in the coverage of this, which, to tell you what a goof I am, I heard this story and I was like, this is awesome. Wow. Well done. One of our allies really did something amazing and cool here. What was the coverage? Escalating violence, the concern about escalating violence. What will happen? The world on edge. And it's like, well, I mean, the world's on edge, guys. This region has been on edge since, I don't know, the Crusades. Feels like it's been a fraught space. And Israel is at war with Hezbollah and Hamas, both proxies for Iran. And they pulled off this daring thing. And the framing of it, I found remarkable. And it was eye-opening for me because the national morning news shows, and I flipped around to see, the framing was the same in every case. I don't think we should be glorying in violence and death and that, yeah, that's great. I wouldn't want to see that. But in each case, the framing was, what will happen now, as opposed to like, can you believe it? The good guys pulled off a good one. And it was instructive for me.
In a lot of it, there was not that much attention paid to the fact that this was retaliation for constant bombardment, Hezbollah's constant bombardment of Israel. Tens of thousands of rockets have been sent over the border targeting civilians since October 8th. That was initiated unprovoked by Hezbollah and has resulted in 70 to 80,000 Israelis having to evacuate their homes. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under an extraordinary amount of pressure to get people back into their homes in the north. These people can't work their normal jobs and their lives are totally disrupted by the constant bombardment from Hezbollah there. And in retaliation, Israel doesn't send rockets indiscriminately targeting civilians the way Hezbollah does. They had this incredibly precise attack on Hezbollah terrorists. And nonetheless, in many parts, there's outrage. And recall, by the way, that it was a Hezbollah rocket that hit a soccer field and killed several teenagers maybe 6 weeks ago. And there's very little mention of that. And a lot of it is because the guiding principle in the White House's foreign policy around the globe is no escalation, without any, I think, awareness of the fact that they don't control whether wars escalate.
Well, and they obviously do not control what Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran do. the United States has a lot to say about what Israel does because we are close allies and we are their principal munitions supplier, and we provide enormous support to Israel. So we have a say about what Israel does, but we don't have any say about what Hezbollah and Hamas do. And what Hezbollah and Hamas have demonstrated over and over and over and over and over again is they are not interested in the well-being of their people. They are not principally interested in the well-being of their people. And that's, how do you deal with an adversary that doesn't respond to the typical pressures in the Westphalian nation state concept of war, in which your adversary is limited, has a limiting principle of we're trying to protect and take care of our people. If that's not the principle that you're dealing with, then what do you do? And I think the answer is you blow up a bunch of terrorists in a strike like this. And the thing that's amazing to me about it is that it works on so many levels. On the one level, yes, they kill or injure all of these foes. But also, if you are Iran, if you are Hamas or you're Hezbollah, you're like, what else do the Israelis have, right? If they were running this, they got us on to use pagers and then they killed us with the pagers. How are they going to communicate? What are they going to do? It's massively disruptive, extraordinarily effective.
Yeah, you really would be afraid to communicate in any way at this point.
Totally.
It has real psychological impact.
Hezbollah should consider de-escalating. I think perhaps they should consider de-escalating.
Chris, we also had earlier in the week the second Trump assassination attempt. This played out at the former president's golf club in West Palm Beach, where police detained the would-be assassin over the fence, and he had a sniper pointed through the bushes and had kind of built a blind and had been there for 12 hours lying in wait for the president, who was golfing the next day. And the coverage of this was fascinating. Politico covered it this way: Republicans outraged over possible assassination attempt. Quote, they are going to keep trying to kill Trump. And the first paragraph reads, Republicans 2 months ago turned the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump into a rallying cry. Now they're responding to what could have been a second attempt with a mixture of defiance, outrage, and unsubstantiated blame. Yeah, I would say Republicans were outraged over an assassination attempt against their presidential nominee. And really, perhaps the question should be why all Americans were not outraged.
Well, the framing of it is offensive to me in a couple of ways. One is that one, the Republicans pounce framing, but also, you think no Democrats are outraged? Do you think every Democrat in America is like, good, I'm glad? No. Ask Jason Crow, who's on the select committee that is investigating the first assassination attempt. He's a Democrat. There's a lot of Democrats who are probably outraged. And so while this is bad coverage in the sense that it frames it as a Republican pounce thing, it also preaches disunity, that somehow there is not, because the correct thing should be bipartisan, because Kamala Harris, Joe Biden called Trump. Everybody called Trump. Everybody's outraged. It's not like this is Democrats saying, yeah, good, he deserves it. Not all Democrats, which of course points us to John Podhoretz's great piece, The Assassination Wish Fulfillment, the indispensable J-Pod writing, of course, at Commentary Magazine, talking about, he writes, so go ahead, Washington Post, say Trump's golfing is the real threat. Go ahead, MSNBC and The Atlantic, say the real problem is Trump talking cruelly about migrants in Ohio. Go ahead and find excuses for a thing that cannot be allowed to happen. If we do reap the whirlwind from the fulfillment of your darkest desires, history will know whom to blame. Not that it will matter, because the damage will have been done. You all think he's asking for it. What you are asking for is a future straight out of Thomas Hobbes. And John goes through and very helpfully chronicles all of this stuff from the folks who do kind of who are kind of saying, yeah, see, that's what you get. Don't be surprised that that's what you get.
That came from pretty high places in that, Lester Holt on the NBC Evening News said somebody tried to assassinate the former president, and it came amid heated rhetoric on the campaign trail as Trump accuses immigrants in Ohio without evidence of eating pets, as if the two are linked somehow, and he had it coming because he is making these claims. And I basically think that's the way it was covered.
Yes.
More or less in the mainstream. Because Trump has been saying these nasty things on the campaign trail, he has contributed to a trash political atmosphere, and he deserved it.
Right. And John's point about, many times do I quote Rochefoucauld, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. I don't know how Kamala Harris really feels about Donald Trump getting shot at, but I'll take her at her word. If she says she's appalled and horrified and so glad he's safe, even if she didn't mean it, I'm glad she said it. Even if Joe Biden didn't care enough to really want to call Donald Trump and offer his condolences, I'm glad he did, because we are acknowledging virtues here that we say, yes, we denounce this. Political violence has no place. This is unacceptable. This is bad. And, I have some complaints about causality in general, and that somehow this is specific to our time. This guy is a wackadoodle among wackadoodles. He is not like even the guy in Pennsylvania who was a stealth wackadoodle that only his neighbors knew was a wackadoodle. The guy in Pennsylvania was a sleeper cell of wackadoodledom. He was waiting. This guy was in the New York Times. This guy was everywhere. He was announcing to the world in the loudest possible voice possible, I am a wackadoodle. He wanted people to know it and was trying to call attention to it. It's not surprising that unwell people try to kill people. Unwell people, sadly, sometimes succeed in killing people. But the idea that we're going to say, well, actually, it's Trump's fault because of what he said. He said this, therefore it's Trump's fault that this happened. I don't know why the guy tried to kill Gabby Giffords. I don't really know why John Hinckley or Sirhan or the list of assassins throughout history really do. I don't know why Charles Guiteau really tried to kill James A. Garfield. They had their own reasoning. They had their own rationales, but they were nuts. They were totally nuts. And if you try to get it into the blame structure, well, Trump said this, therefore that, then you're going down the wrong path. Just accept that human beings, we are a problematic species.
Well, Chris, should we get into this pet eating situation?
Well,
and the coverage of it?
Well, first, I do want to laud the great Jonah Goldberg, who wrote a good piece on all of this from the other side, talking about how, talking about how the reverse is true as well. So Donald Trump, so it is wrong for Democrats or people on the left in the media to say Donald Trump brought it on himself. It's also wrong for Donald Trump to say that it's the rhetoric of Democrats that caused it. And this is a problem that Republicans have in spades right now, which is not avoiding what they say are the failings of the left, but mimicking them and intensifying them. Donald Trump says the worst stuff about Kamala Harris. He calls her a fascist. He calls her a communist. He says that the country will be destroyed if she's elected, that America will never last. And then they turn around and say that because Democrats say, not without cause, that Donald Trump is a threat to the democratic process, that it's their fault that people are trying to kill Trump. And Jonah did an excellent chronicling of the sort of reflexive bias, the knee-jerk response. Kamala Harris did not cause assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Unwell people caused assassination attempts on Donald Trump. The gun industry did not cause assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Whatever a unhealthy discourse did not cause assassination attempts on Donald Trump. And for Trump to say the most appalling things, just the rottenest, most appalling, most demagogic things about his opponents, and then for Republicans to turn around and blame Democrats for this stuff is total hogwash.
I agree with that. I don't think the rhetoric is to blame. I think what rankles the right is that every time there's an assassination attempt or some kind of violence on the left, the rhetoric of the right is blamed for it. And when this stuff happens, there are faux cries from politicians on the left about toning down the rhetoric when these people have been saying he's a threat to democracy. That was Joe Biden's campaign rallying cry for the past 4 years. And they have no intention of doing that. So there's this sort of play acting on both sides. But every single time that there's political violence of any kind aimed at the left, the rhetoric of the right is the finger pointing is at the rhetoric of the right.
I think my answer to the right would be tough toenails. This is, yes,
there is a desire to say, well, screw you guys. And I understand that. Like, I don't actually think it's correct and it's the cause, but it is maddening. It is maddening to see the press point fingers one way and not the other.
As my dear mother would have told me, well, people in hell want ice water too. And I get it. I understand. I totally understand why Republicans think that it's unfair, because it is. The response, the Hobbesian future, Jonah is writing the other perspective from the other way to get to the Hobbesian dystopian future that John is warning of. And that is to say, oh yeah, well, if you can lie and you can slander and you can smear, then we get to lie and slander and smear too. I don't think it even works with voters. I think it's self-soothing. I think it is as the kids would say, I think it's cope. I think it's self-soothing that they say, and unfortunately, caught in the crossfire is normalcy and decency. And you cannot engage in this stuff. And a guy who calls his opponent a fascist cannot say that the reason he's getting shot at is because of the violent rhetoric of the other side. It's garbage.
Chris, you had flagged this Wall Street Journal piece.
Amaze.
And I will read from it. A Vance spokesman on Thursday provided the Wall Street Journal with a police report in which a resident had claimed her pet might have been taken by Haitian neighbors. But when a reporter went to Anna Kilgore's house Tuesday evening, she said her cat, Miss Sassy, which went missing in late August, had actually returned a few days later, found safe in her own basement. Kilgore, wearing a Trump shirt and hat, said she apologized to her Haitian neighbors with the help of her daughter and a mobile phone translation app.
Yeah, the idea that someone would actually go and check shouldn't be as remarkable as it was. You know, I'm watching JD Vance, and he was taken not entirely out of context, but out of context when he used the phrase create stories to describe what he was doing with Springfield. He wasn't saying that he was making up stories. He was saying he's pushing stories into the narrative. This is sort of like Kellyanne Conway and the alternative facts. She wasn't saying it's a lie. She was saying that these are other facts, but it sticks and people repeat it and all of that stuff. So when JD Vance was smearing the Haitian immigrant population of Springfield, Ohio, he wasn't defending lying. He was saying there were questions. I wanted answers, so I pushed this story into the narrative to call attention to the larger issue. What followed, of course, was this effort to make it be true, right? Make it be true. And one of the things that proponents of JD Vance's point of view were echoing was, well, there were reports. Well, sure, there's reports of Bigfoots. There's reports of everything. You can find reports of anything. But what we need here is evidence. We need proof. So the Wall Street Journal said, okay, what do you got? And they said, here's the police report. So they went on the ground, and a reporter went and found the lady. And I think we should all be grateful that Miss Sassy was found and unconsumed, had not been barbecued. But good for the Wall Street Journal for actually going and doing the work and finding out about the cat who got found and giving us an answer.
to what extent do you think the Trump campaign's retailing of this line has worked to draw attention to what's going on in Springfield, which is a legitimate, story of a small Rust Belt town struggling with an influx of, between 15 and 20,000 migrants in a town that was 60,000 is now about 80,000.
Right. But it was also a town that shrank and is going to die. And then the Haitian. So the Kevin Williamson's piece on this is so good. And guess what? Immigration is a real mixed bag. It's a real mixed bag. They wanted the workers. They needed the workers. They got the workers. The economy improved. Things got better. But Haitians didn't follow American traffic laws. There was a tragic story about a child being killed in a traffic accident. It's hard, right? Immigration is not good or bad. It's good and bad. And reasonable restraints on immigration are important and all this stuff. And it's a complicated story. When it comes to the political effect of telling the story of the pet-eating Haitians, it is net bad for Donald Trump. But it doesn't mean, just like immigration, it doesn't mean that it's all bad for the Republicans. It's bad because it reinforces the things that make persuadable suburbanite voters uncomfortable with Trump and Vance. It's bad. It's ugly. It's dishonest. It icks them out. On the other hand, to your point, what are we talking about? We're talking about immigration. And anytime we're talking about immigration, there are liabilities for Harris because persuadable voters, especially working class persuadable voters, say, yeah, I don't know whether they ate a cat or not, but I am reminded that hundreds of thousands of migrants have poured into the interior of the nation in the past 4 years, and they don't like it. And so I would be cautious. I don't know. We talked about this last week. I would be, if I was a Democrat, I'd be very cautious about dunking on this too much because the story that it's about is bad for Trump on layer one, but layer two, it's bad for Biden.
Yeah, the reason I asked is that I have a sense that the way this is actually playing is a lot more complicated than, oh, these guys are telling a lie. I think it's a lot more mixed. And on this, I don't trust the reaction of the elite media. And I also think that the media's overreaction to talk constantly about how this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, and to pound it into the ground, I think that has an impact that backfires.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. My analogy about Trump, the orangutan, he's going to break up all the crockery in your house and slap you in the face and steal your beer, but you can put him on TikTok and get the views. You can monetize the problem of the orangutan. And I think that this is very much that story. And as you say, all the breathless coverage and all the dunking on the left about this comes at a cost. It costs them. If the subject is immigration or inflation, it's bad for the party in power. If the subject is Donald Trump, it's good for the party in power. This has elements of both.
Chris, did you want to talk about this?
Oh, there's the Jonah piece.
Yes.
There it is. Okay. Yeah. Jonah touches on this stuff in this piece, barely anything there, but it's generally a meditation on the self-destructive, the Republican autoimmune disorder in which they blame the media for everything and as a consequence don't look at themselves more closely. So there it is.
All right.
Oh, speaking of elites, Meghan McArdle is an elite, but she's a great elite. She is the best kind of elite. And so Scientific American, which is still a thing, endorses Kamala Harris. I know everybody was waiting breathlessly. What will Scientific American do? I couldn't decide my vote until I heard whether or not Scientific American was going to endorse Donald Trump. And it turns out you'll be surprised to hear that they did not. So Matt Iglesias writes, at this point, I have to believe that the people pushing these interventions have heard the counter arguments and just don't care. The incentives in this space are bad. And the great Meghan McArdle responds saying, I've had conversations with many journalists who argue that these sorts of policies, and my experience is that they sincerely confuse intra-elite discourse for a broader social conversation. They want to use their institutional power to, quote, send a message about Trump, but do not think too hard about to whom they are sending the message or whether their institutional prestige carries any weight with those people. The result is, of course, a massive backfire. They lose institutional prestige with the Trump supporters and Trump-curious folks they want to convince, while garnering kudos from people within their own circles who have already heard and agreed with their message. But I don't think they're deciding to do it despite the backfire. They just really don't take the possibility of backfire seriously. More broadly, I think these folks somehow believe that if they just try hard enough, it can be 1983 again, with 3 networks and a network of prestige journalists and academics who all know each other, where shifting the consequences of that group could have huge effects on what the public knew and talked about. That world was already dying when most of today's journalists entered the industry, but they're like the last pagan generation of ancient Rome, continually trying to resurrect the old regime and continually surprised and frustrated that the power they once had within their reach keeps retreating farther and farther from their hands, even as they redouble their efforts to restore it. 10 out of 10, no notes, yes.
I totally agree with that. And I think it applies not just to Scientific American, but to the entire elite media that is more focused on the responses of and adulation of their peers. And I don't think they're unaware that, you know, Trump curious or Trump friendly normal folk sneer at them. I think they have contempt for those people and consider those people ill-informed, ignorant. And I think the people whose opinions they value are those of their peers, and that's the only people they ever really talk to.
Yeah, who do they think they're convincing, right? Who is the Scientific American subscriber that said, boy, you put it that way? Now, there's something to be said for taking care of your base. There's something to be said for keeping a full head of steam. The Republicans do it. The Democrats do it. You suck up to your own base. You keep them fed and watered. And you say, 50 days to go, 46 days to go. We're going to push through. Let's be excited. And I suppose that there's some consequence of that for Scientific American. But I agree entirely with you that the contempt that is evident in getting out of your lane, we've watched this at universities, where universities dabbled in, well, we have to speak out. Post George Floyd, we have to speak out. Okay, well, now what do you got? Oh, you're alienating all these other potential people. And instead of doing your job, you want to do our job. We have a job. You and I have a job. We talk about politics all the time. We obsess about it, literally, figuratively. We're in it. We do it. You're Scientific American, shut up, right? What they say? Shut up and sing was the old right-wing line.
It wasn't shut up and dribble.
Well, that was the successor in talking about LeBron James.
Yeah.
But I would say,
am I going to get canceled for saying that?
I would say, shut up and do your job, generally speaking. Not everybody needs to be a political pundit. Not everybody needs to engage in partisan work of the election. Who wondered what the publishers and editors of Scientific American thought about Donald Trump? Who among us? And this is different than Republicans who are endorsing Harris. Now, that's a good and bad. That's a mixed bag thing. Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, whoever your list, the former Bush and Reagan administration officials and Trump administration officials who are coming out against Trump and endorsing Harris. That cuts both ways, right? I don't think it persuades many Republicans, but it might persuade some Republican-leaning independents or whatever.
If she would come out with this is my cabinet, and we were going to get Dick Cheney, a sec def.
Can you imagine?
I mean, I'm just saying.
What a world.
People could be persuaded.
What a world. But those people are in politics and government, and whether one thinks that their endorsements matter or don't matter, it's the work they've chosen. It's where they are. But when you step out of your job and get into politics, just like these universities found and all these legacy publications have found, when you do that, you're trading your credibility with persuadable voters, you're not gaining credibility.
Related to this, I was amused to pull up the New York Times and see this headline: NYC COVID czar partied while preaching social distancing. And I just thought it was of a piece with a story about cratering trust in our elites. And the person who it's about was Bill de Blasio's COVID czar, Jay Varma. And it says, in hidden camera video posted by a conservative podcaster, and that's Steven Crowder, of all people, Dr. J.K. Varma boasts about flouting the public health guidelines he insisted others follow. And the Times writes, the video appears to have been compiled from several recordings in which Dr. Varma is seen at a number of restaurants and cafes chatting with a woman who remains off camera. At various points, he describes a sex party he and his wife held in a hotel and a dance party he attended in a space under a bank on Wall Street, joined by more than 200 people.
What?
In a statement, Dr. Varma did not dispute the recording's authenticity, but said
there were 200 people at the dance party, not the sex party, because that's too big of a sex party. I don't know what the right size for a sex party, but 200 seems too big.
Yes, the dance party. In a statement, Dr. Varma did not dispute the recording's authenticity, but said they had been spliced, diced, and taken out of context. He said he attended 3 gatherings between August 2020 and June 2021. At the time, public health officials in New York, like those in cities and countries around the world, were frantically seeking to contain the virus and COVID's rising death toll by encouraging people to wear masks and avoid large gatherings. New York City schools were abruptly closed beginning in March 2020. Indoor dining in restaurants was forbidden. Masking indoors in public places was mandatory. Yes.
The perfect do as I say, not as I do. Rules for me, but not for thee.
100%. Chris, we would be remiss not to talk about the breaking news story this morning, which is that New York Magazine has put its political reporter, Olivia Nuzzi, on leave over an alleged sexting relationship with RFK Jr.
Yeah.
She is 31. He is 70 or 70, I guess. So the New York Post writes, New York Magazine's Washington correspondent, Olivia Nuzzi, was placed on leave after she had an alleged romantic relationship with former independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. while covering his campaign. Nuzzi, without naming the 70-year-old Kennedy scion, admitted in a Thursday night statement that earlier this year, quote, the nature of some communications between myself and a former reporting subject turned personal. The 31-year-old star political reporter insisted the relationship was not physical in nature. Sources told the Post that Nuzzi and RFK Jr. were allegedly sexting while she was engaged and he was married.
Yeah, all I can say is what a lucky lady that Cheryl Hines is. Just congratulations, Cheryl Hines.
I mean, that's a real no-no.
That's a no-no, and obviously I'm sure Olivia is chagrined, and this, good for her for owning up to it and all that stuff. I have to give him credit for this. Whatever else anyone thinks of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he has never for 5 minutes done what he was supposed to do throughout this campaign. It's helped him. It's helped Trump in some ways. But, I mean, the bear in Central Park, the beheaded whale, and now sexting with a reporter covering him. It's just, yeah.
Okay. That brings us, Chris, to our facile file, where we have a New York Times profile of Americans who want to leave the country because of their frustrations, fears, and disappointments with American politics, and they are ready to live and work in another country. Hit it.
This summer, nearly 2,000 readers responded to a New York Times survey asking if they would leave the United States should their favorite candidate lose the presidential election in November. Another 3,000 people responded to similar questions asked over social media. Some respondents had already moved. Others were taking the steps. Their reasons were varied, though the candidates at the top of the ballot figured prominently. blah, 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 blah from here. Why is this so facile? Every time. I'm moving to Canada if so-and-so wins the election. I'm leaving if so-and-so wins the election. And we start with a Trump supporter who, this is hilarious, says he's moving to France.
I loved that. I have to say, I really did love that detail.
If Trump loses, I'm moving to, wait for it, France. I'm going to go to France. I don't know whether that guy's actually going to move to France if Donald Trump loses, but it's possible that he might just want to live in France. Maybe possible. He's old, he's rich, maybe he just wants to move to France. These stories, I don't want to malign this story because it does have interesting vignettes of individual pictures of individual people who are political obsessives and what it drives them to. But guess what? A lot more people will seek to move to the United States from those countries where these people are going than Americans will go to those countries. A lot more, right? A lot more people will try to move from Western European countries into the United States. A lot more people will move because the places they're going, Finland, Panama, Portugal, Schaffhausen, Switzerland, Mexico, Berlin or Paris, open, Toronto. The number of people, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, another aspirant Parisian, Canada, the number of people who come from all of those places and are desperately trying to get into the United States will so far outnumber the number of Americans, mostly rich Americans, who will entertain the idea of moving to a foreign country. And the facileness about this is, yeah, we hear it every election, and every year a lot of Americans move overseas, and every year a lot more people from overseas move to the United States. This is life. Welcome to life.
Chris.
Oh, this
is like written with you in mind. Written with you in mind.
Just.
Thank you, New York Times. Thank you. Thank you.
This piece on the food costs of protein. What does your meat really cost? What does protein really cost you? And the New York Times writes, say a pound of beef costs $5.34 at your local supermarket. That price, according to researchers, leaves out something important: beef's heavy environmental toll. Add in things like deforestation and water use, they say, and the price of ground beef would be a lot higher. The premise of this piece, this astonishing piece, is that if we were to include the costs for water use, emissions, and, quote, ecosystem effects of a pound of ground beef, it wouldn't be $5.34. It would be $22.02. That's how much it would be. Of cheese, only 2 more cents. You can feel good about that. Chicken, cheese is doubles in price. Chicken almost doubles in price. Tofu, only 21 cents more. And chickpeas, feel great about it, only 74 cents more do they really cost. It just makes me so mad. A price is a embedded message that includes all of the costs that it took to get to you. If you've never watched iPencil, if you're not aware of how commerce works, a price is a signal, is a message that the consumer gets that reflects everything that went into it. This is how it goes. These people say that an exterior force should come in and assess extra cost in that price to deal with the environmental degradation of these things. Now, first of all, you can already pay extra for beef if you want to. You can pay extra for grass-fed, hormone-free. You can do it. You can absolutely go do it. I do it. I don't do it all the time, but shout out to the whole ox butcher. I'll pay extra for meat. I don't like all grass-fed. You got to finish it with corn. It's the marbleization people. It's the fat content. You can let them graze in pasture, but you got to finish on corn so you get the good fat and marbleization. Hear me. But you can already pay extra for beef that reflects those other things. You can do it. And The idea that some panel of scientists, that some panel of regulators is going to correctly determine what these costs are, impose those costs, and then what? And spend it? Where are they going to spend it? What are they going to do with that extra money? How are they going to deal with these problems? Or would it get sucked into a black hole of United Nations waste, fraud, abuse, misdirection, blah, 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 blah? This was, of all of the meat shaming, this one I think offended me so much because it was so economically illiterate. Other than just the regular beef shaming, the economic illiteracy of this piece just blew my wig off. I was just amazed. It was facile, even in a genre that tends to be facile.
I will feel wonderful eating a steak tonight.
Get off mistakes. That's all I'm saying. Get off mistakes.
All right, Chris, you also have to do this obit because I did not know this individual.
Neil King died after he was diagnosed with cancer quite a while ago. And he passed away this week. And Neil King covered Washington for the Wall Street Journal for years. I got to know him just a little bit. And he was just a great guy. He was just an absolutely great guy. And he left the Journal and decided to write a book and decided that he was going to spend his post-cancer diagnosis life doing the things that he loved, spending time with the people he loved. And he wrote a very interesting book called American Ramble, where he basically walks the Eastern Seaboard. He hikes all the way up, and he's a good writer, and it's interesting. And Neil was really one of the good ones. And when I say that, I mean, he wasn't I guess you'd say he was a nice guy, but he wasn't like some sort of cherubic, angelic figure. He was a real, ink-stained wretch. He was one of us. He was that kind of a guy. And he did it with real aplomb, and he did it with real dignity, and he made a real good end for himself. So rest in peace, Neil King.
Chris, that brings us to our style section.
And what style we've got?
We do. Actually, this is a great follow from our obituary. The New York Times had a piece, Inside the Funeral Home for New York's Luminaries. Everybody dies, but not everybody is embalmed at Frank E. Campbell, a discreet mortuary on Manhattan's Upper East Side. And it starts Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, John Lennon, Greta Garbo, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Mae West, Arthur Ashe, and so on and so on. What do these people have in common? The answer is that shortly after their deaths, they passed through the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Home on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. For over a century, Frank E. Campbell has been the mortuary of choice for New York's power brokers and celebrities. In some circles, to end up anywhere else would be a fate even worse than death. The writer Gay Talese, a longtime Upper East Sider, has lost count of how many services he has attended there. For a certain kind of person, they must end up at Campbell as a matter of honor and status, Mr. Talese, 92, said. And Campbell is the rare New York business that might never close because it will never run out of customers because everyone dies. Eventually, sure, I'll probably have my own moment at Campbell, he continued. I'll enter reclined on my back and have a moment of silence while friends and relatives come stare at me. It's the final stop, the last picture show. And there's amazing pictures in this piece of various funeral services inside and outside this place, but it's fabulous.
What a great piece, and what a great insight and a good backstage pass. This is really style reporting at its very, very best. I really loved it.
It is, and it's going through a $20 million renovation right now.
Wow.
So the Times reporter went inside as that was happening.
Amazeballs. Now, this next one was sent in by Alert Wretches listener. Well, I don't know if I should. I never know whether people want to be identified or not identified. But if you sent me this piece, you know it was you. And I won't stain your credibility by letting people know that you listen to Ink-Stained Wretches. But on the subject matter, you will have to lead us.
Yes. So this is a Bloomberg piece The headline of which is, "Has it gotten too hard to buy a Birkin or Kelly? A lawsuit against Hermes and a scandal around Dior pricing show how the threat to luxury isn't just economic." And this is about basically Hermes, the luxury brand, sells two handbags that you can't just go to the website and order them. You have to like have a relationship with some person behind the counter there. And these bags sell for like $10,000, $20,000. I mean, some of them might cost $100,000, but they are hard to get, and they make it intentionally hard to get so that they're even more exclusive. But they are like, even in the luxury handbag world, they're insanely expensive. And so Hermes is now the subject of a lawsuit where two shoppers in California are arguing that Hermes is breaking antitrust law. And Bloomberg writes, the idea of the lawsuit filed in March this year appears to be to make top-end goods more widely available. Yet this is at odds with the very nature of luxury. Just as I was saying, some handbags, watches, and cars simply aren't meant for everyone. It's the aura of exclusivity around these items that encourages an even wider range of people to buy the more affordable designer goods. Silk scarves in the case of Hermes, perfume, lipstick, and sunglasses elsewhere. But this relationship may be breaking down. So I want to find, so this says, yes, 142,000 Kelly and Birkin handbags were produced in 2021, according to estimates from Lucas Solka, an analyst at Bernstein, generating about $2.2 billion in revenue, but demand runs to many multiples of what the brand can produce. Those wanting a bag, which started about $10,000, fill out a form in store known as an Hermes Wish, which is basically a registration of interest and typically lasts for about 8 months. If a bag is received that matches the wish, the customer is contacted. It's not quite clear how the wish is fulfilled behind the scenes. So these two shoppers allege in their complaint that they were required to buy other products like belts and shoes and scarves in order to get the Birkin.
Oh, this
Yes.
is what the meme content is about. I
Yes.
see.
And Hermes says,
you have to show that you're legit.
yeah.
Before
So
they'll show
Hermes
you the
says
bag.
that's not true, and that even if it were, it wouldn't violate antitrust laws. And I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
How much do these bags cost?
They're $10,000 and up. Like some of them can be 30 grand,
People
40
are
grand.
wild.
It's crazy.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
Wild.
Totally
and
crazy.
And the next item you have to do too, because I have never seen the show Love is Blind.
All right. So the next item is in the Washingtonian. Meet the cast of Love is Blind DC. So Love is Blind, we've talked about it before, I think, is a show where people date, but they are in these rooms where they can't see each other.
Okay.
And
It's like
so
the Bachelor show or the
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they can't see each other, and hence Love is Blind. And then they have to, like, they propose to each other basically without having ever seen each other. And it's supposed to test this proposition that love is blind. Obviously, most of these things crash and burn. There are supposed to be weddings on the show. Some of them have actually succeeded, but not very many. Anyhow, it's coming to Washington, and that's going to be amazing. It will be very interesting. So I looked at the occupations, which is exactly what Washingtonian did. And they write, looking at the occupations, DC's top employer is noticeably unrepresented, the government. The pods appear to have been marked safe from policy wonks and former hill turns, though you never know what's lurking in someone's past. Instead, real estate gets a strong showing in season 7. 4 out of the 29 contestants work in the industry.
That's very DC.
I will totally be watching this.
And I assume that if they're going to have a representative sample of DC and they're avoiding policy people and politicos, that we're going to have real estate agents and consultants. The Deloitte community should be represented.
Well, we'll see. And then the other thing I forgot to say is the men kind of live, in I don't even know how, when they're dating, the men go back and all talk together and the women go back and talk together. But these people can be chatting with, they can each be dating the same people. So there's a little tension. It's just like The Bachelor.
Well, I assume this will be a mountain of cringe. And
it is.
But you know what we should do? I propose we should watch an episode of this and review it on an upcoming podcast.
That would be awesome.
All right, we will do it.
Okay. Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week. And I wanted to talk about, in my obsession of the week, a little bit more about what's happening in Israel and what I view as an unwritten story that seems like sort of an obvious one playing out there to me, which is the failure of the Biden administration's diplomatic efforts in the region. And I mentioned before that the administration, their goal all along since October 7th has been no escalation, no escalation, no escalation. And they have been attempting to exert enormous pressure on Israel. They have shown little ability to control the actions of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. And it was striking to me that the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on last Sunday, to tell him, do not escalate against Hezbollah. On Monday, a White House senior advisor, Amos Hochstein, was on the ground in Israel meeting with senior Israeli officials when this attack happened. Sorry, the day before this attack happened. On Tuesday, the pager attack happened. On Wednesday, round 2 happened. And yesterday, on Thursday, Israel was bombing Lebanon, followed up those 2 attacks with bombing. And clearly, and today, on Friday, we got word that the White House sees no prospect for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Joe Biden's term. And that's, of course, what they've been seeking for the past 11 months. And I'm waiting for the story to be written about the utter failure of the Biden administration's efforts to contain the uncontainable. I see that as an important story here.
I wouldn't, I know you're speaking tongue in cheek, and I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah. But I do think, for our listeners, this is an important story to track.
Yes. If you keep saying this is our goal and you keep failing at your goal, you have to conclude either you're not sincere about the goal or you're bad at it, or maybe a little of both.
You're up, Chris.
Oh, well, I'm the worst. But headline, White House, First Lady Jill Biden will host an event Friday at the White House to mark the 25th anniversary of the television series The West Wing. Now, you know that I don't like The West Wing. And you know that I don't like I decried it when Aaron Sorkin wrote a piece. Oh, the Democrats should nominate Mitt Romney, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, come on. Like, what are you talking about? And I don't know what show politically obsessed people like now, but when I was young, it was The West Wing, and everybody was really into it. There was a House of Cards phase and the first season of House of Cards was good, but the idea of this, and I don't want to make too much of it because it's just a TV show and it's just a little event that the First Lady's having, and I'm not denouncing all of this stuff, but people, give it up with The West Wing. Give it up with The West Wing. The writing is terrible. It's if you create a world, part of what's wrong with our politics, the West Wing played a small role in contributing to, which is if we could just get the spin right, if we could just get the messaging right, as soon as they would say it, then it would change everything. That's not how politics works. Of the 6% of the electorate that is undecided or persuadable, these are not people who say, boy, President Bartlett's speech on this really changed my mind on XYZ. And the idea that dialogue and speech is the answer to all these things. I am an enormous proponent of excellent political rhetoric. We don't have any right now, right? There's not a surplus of excellent political rhetoric, but the idea that what is missing is Sorkin-esque rhetoric, and the self-serious twaddle that is pumped out constantly always gets my goat. So I will not obsess very long about this, but I just wanted to obsess briefly in order to point out and say, watch something else.
Okay. Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we have a note from Steve Bacon in Dayton, Ohio, who writes, Chris and Eliana, while the hubbub about NPR has died down, today what may be one of the most NPR podcasts ever appeared in my feed. I had to share. Men, Beef, and a Climate Change Solution, up first from NPR. From the podcast summary, eating less beef could make a large dent in Americans' climate pollution. But data show it's men who are disproportionately eating beef. Now, food and climate researchers are thinking about how to impact climate pollution through the lens of gender. But for many U.S. men, eating fewer burgers or steaks can require overcoming some big obstacles. Man. Feel free to peruse the transcript if you don't have time to listen. Topics include Meatfluencers, the myth of man's primordial consumption of meat, men's disproportionate consumption of meat, the role of railroads and refrigeration in spreading meat consumption, soy disinformation.
Damn you, Leland Stanford. Damn you, Leland Stanford.
How these men contribute to climate change, and an interview with a gender studies professor discussing re-educating men and eating meat.
Oh, man. Oh, man. Well, all I can say, since I've already been on a tirade about my pro-beef propaganda, I guess I am a meatfluencer. I'm meatfluenced today. So I guess I am guilty of what they accuse me. But, you know, last night, my betrothed, the great Jessica Malugin, emceed the Competitive Enterprise Institute dinner where George Will, a great journalist, was given their award. And he was introduced by another great journalist, Kevin Williamson. And it was great. And she did a great job. She looked beautiful. She did wonderful work. But you know, the best thing for me that she did all that night, other than look glamorous and be charming and great, she ordered the steak and gave me her steak because I wasn't going to eat the dessert. I wasn't going to eat whatever. And she ordered the steak so she could give it to me. And no greater love hath any pony than to give her bear her fillet. Perfect.
All right, Chris.
Meatfluencer.
We have a note from Max in Charleston, South Carolina. Who writes,
hi, Max.
Wretches. Years ago, my grandparents' pantry became infested with weevils.
Oh.
The heck is that?
Oh, you don't know weevils?
No. I don't want to.
You don't want them.
Ew. Oh, my gosh.
You don't want none.
What the heck is that?
You don't want to sign up for any weevils.
Okay. And after throwing away all of the visibly contaminated items, the rest had to be frozen as an extra precaution. So as a 13-year-old, fate placed in front of me a bowl of very frozen Fruity Pebbles cereal.
Hey.
At the moment, I experienced the same satisfaction that I imagine was felt by the first person to chill a martini glass before filling it with gin. It's just better that way. You have to try it. I saw some woman on Instagram, speaking of this, yesterday eating frozen popcorn who said that that's the way to eat it. So I totally believe this.
So I think, Max, this is a real breakthrough because there's the Shaquille O'Neal method.
What's that?
Where you put ice cubes in with the milk and cereal to keep it cold and help with the crunchiness. But freezing the cereal is genius because I heard from several of you who pointed out that how dare I complain about sogginess of Cinnamon Toast Crunch when I was expounding on the virtues of the most sog adjacent of all cereals, the Pebbles community and the Cocoa Krispies community as well, of course, which I'm here for. And you know what? You have a point. It's going to happen fast if you don't get to it. But if you freeze the cereal, are you not heightening the crunch and prolonging the onset of SOG? Max, I think you've done it. And I promise you that I will have my children engage in research on this and report back. This is genius business. Talk about lemons into lemonade, weevils into
Oh my gosh.
crispier Pebble cereals. Max, love you, baby.
Chris, that brings us to your favorite time of the week, where I am forced to say something nice. But come on, get at it.
Well,
Lead by example.
I've so often complained about the Washington Post not covering local news, and they did a great piece. Headline: 12-year-old girl was hit by a car. It had $19,770 in unpaid tickets. And the piece goes through and finds these cars, these drivers, and the driver that have that are driving around with these massive fines, massive infractions on the vehicle, and they're not getting enforced. And obviously, these are dangerous drivers, right? We're talking about, I don't know in this case, but we're talking about people with multiple DUIs. We're talking about multiple infractions. We're talking about unpaid tickets. And DC is not enforcing these things. And as a consequence, unsafe drivers are staying on the road longer than they should. And I just wanted to give kudos to the Post for devoting resources to and giving big attention to a story that deserved resources and attention. Good for them.
Well, my favorite item was a Wall Street Journal piece that was fascinating. It was real life. What was the TV show, Chris?
The Americans.
The Americans. Oh my gosh. How could I blank on that? From 6 days ago. The kids who didn't know their parents were Russian spies. Putin romanticizes Moscow's network of deep cover operatives, but their missions come with a heavy price. And this is about 2 Russian spies who were in Argentina and were returned home as part of the prisoner swap that freed Evan Gershkovich. And it's amazing. So their kids thought their parents were just regular Argentine citizens. And the piece notes, even after they were caught and jailed for espionage, the couple still hadn't told their children that Spanish, the family's language, was a second tongue. Learned to fluency for a secret assignment meant to last until the siblings came of age and could hopefully be recruited to follow in their footsteps. Now free and giving TV interviews in Moscow, the Doltsevs have become transformed from ordinary Argentine immigrants into 2 of Russia's most famous spies. Their admirers include Putin himself, who was waiting for them at the airport with a bouquet of flowers. When they descended the stairs from their jet, the president embraced them both, tenderly kissing a weeping Anna Doltseva on her cheek, then shoulder. Their employer, the SVR, didn't reply to detailed questions or requests for an interview. But this is all about the foreign espionage division of the KGB and how these 2 kids had absolutely no idea about what their parents did.
Totally wild.
And it's fascinating.
What a good piece.
Fascinating. Well, that is all the news we have about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced this week in the absence of Colin Chicola by Jennifer Hupfel. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.